Aloha and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Eila Algood, and I'm happy today to bring to you from my small town here in Hawaii, Donna Beumler. Donna's going to be sharing some of her written work, and then we're going to follow that up with some talk story. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you, Eila. Thank you very much for having me. This is a piece of flash fiction that I wrote recently. It's called Women's Night Out. It happens only one night each year, but it's always a summer night. And also, one night is better than nothing. From 5 o'clock in the evening until 5 o'clock the next morning, women all over the country dance in the streets. Some women take solitary walks around their local parks until they find comfortable benches overlooking duck ponds. And here they sit and read, immersed in books of poetry or politics. When the sun finally sinks low in the sky and a breeze stirs, they lay down on their benches and sigh into peaceful evening naps. Other women gather in crowded bars as the music starts up. They twirl on bar stools in their shortest skirts, and they couldn't care less who's looking because all the bartenders are women. So is everyone else in the bar. You see, on this one night, this one glorious midsummer night in America, women are safe and every single man is locked inside. I know what you're thinking. How is this possible? As the saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. Men are not allowed outside for any reason under any circumstances. I won't say it's like a shock collar type of thing. That would be unthinkable. But use your imagination. And imagine this. Women in big cities all over the country meeting in noisy restaurants or sipping Chardonnay at sidewalk cafes while enjoying a balmy summer evening. They stay until late into the night, blissfully without fear as to how they're getting home because they know the cab drivers are all women and even the subway is safe. On this evening, women in rural communities play softball in vacant lots under the orange glow of a setting sun. In the suburbs, they gather on street corners and front porches to share cups of coffee and conversation. Some take their daughters and head out of town, hiking their favorite trails in the dusky hours, all without the slightest fear that men will slink out of the shadows towards them. Now, don't get me wrong, most men are good people. And those men celebrate our night out with us by staying home. These men have the decency to be ashamed. In fact, some of them even helped us design the restraining devices used one very special night a year. And on that special night, quite a few women drive old trucks with dim headlights over deeply rutted roads to visit great aunts and grandmothers and to learn. They learn how to fold corn husks to make tamales, fry up green tomatoes, bake baklava. Some will learn how to quilt. Others how to fix a flat tire on an old truck with dim headlights. Some women head out to a lake or an ocean and slip naked into water glistening in moonlight. Other women walk deep into woods fragrant with pine and camp in clearings, warmed by fires they built themselves. Women who are not so mobile are assisted by teenage girls from the neighborhood in a stroll around the block or up to the rooftops of their buildings, where they tilt their heads back and wait for shooting stars to wish upon. And the women twirling in their short skirts on those bar stools, well, they could stumble in their highest heels over to a girlfriend's house to sleep on the couch with nothing more to menace them than a hangover in the morning. Or they could get a ride home just before dawn by a police officer who is both professional and compassionate because, of course, she too is a woman. It's our night out. Grab your books, your daughters, your glasses of wine, and come dance in the streets with us.
All right. Well, thank you for reading that piece. I love that. I've heard it before, and I love what you've done with it. I want to say, well, let me ask you first. Where did your inspiration for that piece come from, would you say?
I think it's a fantasy of mine, being a woman of a certain age, having grown up in and lived in metropolitan areas, busy cities, even small towns where it was risky for women to be out at night alone after dark. Mm-hmm. And so I fantasize about what that would be like. And I'm jealous of men who can go out after dark and not have any real worries about being vulnerable. So it's a fantasy of mine. And sometimes when something simmers in my brain for a really long time, it ends up being helpful to just put it down on paper. It's cathartic. It's healing in a way to actually write about it. And so that's what I did with this. And I've been revising it a little bit. And I have to say that I think that I'm probably not the only woman that has had this fantasy.
I hope that this gets published in many places, because for me, it does a couple of big things. One, it inspires other women to have that kind of vision, because to me, that's a very positive possibility that you put out there. And it also informs men who maybe walk through the world not thinking about that because they don't have to, that, wow, okay, so this is a thing for my sister, my girlfriend, whoever, something that they think about and are. You talk about it, as if it's something that used to happen, but it still happens plenty. And I remember being told by my father, when you're out by yourself, he gave me all these street things to know about walking around the city. And I always had a knife in my pocket and so I really feel like your piece speaks to really everyone, whatever gender. It can really inform. So thank you. Tell us a bit about you as a writer. When did you first think of yourself as a writer, or was there a moment?
I'm not sure I've ever thought of myself as a writer. It's a work in progress. Everything I write is a work in progress. But I've been writing as long as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, poems. And I grew up in a dysfunctional home, and there was a lot going on in my head about that, because back in the day, that wasn't talked about generally. People didn't discuss problems and issues, addiction, domestic violence in the home, not the way they do now. And so I had a lot of thoughts about what was going on as I was growing up. And so I put it into poems. So then as I became a lawyer and it became part of my job to write, I've always just loved it. When I stopped being a lawyer, I was a judge for a while. And I had all this stuff in my head. It's just simmering away, these issues that I had dealt with my clients as a criminal defense attorney, and things I had seen as a judge, and trauma and abuse. And so I wrote a novel. It ended up being a legal thriller. But part of that, it started as being something cathartic, just to kind of get my thoughts out of my head and down on paper and take a look at it. And it was healing in some ways. It was therapeutic to put, nearly 20 years of the criminal justice system out of my head and down into a book. So that's, I don't always write dark things. Sometimes it's just something that I've enjoyed, or something nice that happened to me. So it's not always dark, but I do find that it is, and I've heard this from other people too, that it is beneficial to write things down and get it out of your head and see what it looks like on paper.
Well, and you bring up a good point, because everyone has experienced some kind of challenges and difficulties, and whether it's personal trauma and or in your profession, you were experiencing all kinds of stories, and you really bring out how valuable it is to write that down. And maybe it grows up to be a novel, and maybe it just gets put in a journal and sits there. But whatever, it's a wonderful tool that we can all use. And And it doesn't cost much, right? You just have your little notebook and your paper or your computer, and away you go. Now, do you have a preferred way of writing, be it, pen, computer, both?
Well, I currently write in the iPad, just because it's portable and I can take it with me somewhere in the yard or anywhere I want to sit. I can work on something. But for all of my life, before iPads became the thing, I did write longhand, and I have a lot of my work from when I was a lawyer and a judge, and then before that when I was writing, and I have saved a lot of it, and I have yellow legal pads that are just full of my writing. I do think it's a lot easier to write on an iPad or a computer because I revise all the time. Yeah. I never am happy with something the first time or the 10th time that I've seen it. And revising is a lot easier on the computer than it is to cross out everything and rewrite it. So yeah, I do like using the computer.
Yeah, I find that sometimes I'll write something when I'm inspired in a pad, but pretty quickly it goes to the computer because, like you say, you want to start revising it right away, and that just doesn't happen easily on a piece of paper. So I think we're pretty fortunate to have the devices we have now. When I think back to when I used to type my poetry on the old clunky typewriter in the 60s and 70s, you make a mistake and you have to start over. And so, I think they're pretty handy.
It's kind of fun sometimes to take a look at photographs or reproductions of old manuscripts from famous authors like Mark Twain, who obviously they'd written in longhand, and you can see the revisions and how vastly their writing morphed over time because of their revisions. Yeah. So yeah, I sometimes wonder what someone like, a Mark Twain or a Charles Dickens, how they would write if they could do their revisions on a computer.
Yeah, imagine having to rewrite your story again and again and again because you keep making all the revisions and you have to start over again. So yeah, we have it's a different world for us, that's for sure. What kind of things would you like people to know about you as a writer? Either your process or maybe what you enjoy about writing or what you find a challenge about writing?
That's an interesting question. I have once, many, many years ago, read or heard a piece of advice for writers. And that advice, you hear a lot of advice, but this one piece of advice was, don't tell me, show me. And I think about that almost every time I write, because when I'm reading, I much more enjoy what I'm reading if it paints a picture for me. And that's what that little piece of advice meant to me is draw me a picture, paint me a picture. Don't tell me what happened, show me what happened. And part of that is I'm very visual. And so I do really enjoy stories and writing where I'm in the picture, I'm in the story. And that's because they've drawn me into their story by painting it for me. I think when I read something that is telling me what happened, I feel like I'm being lectured to. So I try to write. I'm not always successful, but I try to write in that fashion where instead of telling you something, I try to paint a picture for the reader.
That's a really good point. That's something I'm still learning because I like to write essay type things from an experience. And I get it from, you and the other people in the writers group who will say, well, show us something. And it's like, oh, yeah. So there's always more. One of the things I love about writing is there's always more to learn, no matter how long you've done it, no matter how much you've done it. There's more that we can learn from one another. And I had another question for you, and it's let's see if it comes back to me.
The other thing I was going to make a comment about in that same vein is that I like to read when there's there's texture and smell and color in the writing. And instead of just telling me that it was a sofa, I want to know that it was threadbare and smelled like the dog, so sort of, flashing back to my own sofa, I guess. But I do like that. I do feel like you can bring the reader into your story by describing what it feels like, what it smells like. If the sun is on your skin, or if you're shaking from the cold. So I do like that aspect. And everybody's different. Not everybody likes that kind of writing. But I do feel like I'm in your story with you if you don't tell me what it looks like, but you show me what it looks like.
Right. And using the senses. I think you bring up a good point. A lot of times we get stuck in what we see, maybe what we hear, but we forget about the smell and the taste and the mood of the space, right? Those are all, like you say, it pulls the reader in when we can use those. Yeah. Do you have a favorite? Oh, go ahead.
Did you think of your question?
Do you have a favorite genre?
Yeah, I love novels. I read just about everything. I love biography, autobiography, historical fiction is one of my favorites. But I'll read any kind of novel if it's well written and intriguing. I just finished a novel by a local boy, a Big Island author, and the novel's called Sharks in the Time of Saviors. And it's relatively new. I think it came out last year. I believe it was on President Obama's favorite book list from last year. And I just finished it, and it's a beautifully written, very mesmerizing, magical novel that takes place here on the Big Island. So I love novels of all kind, anywhere they're set, including historical novels. But I have a lot of fun reading novels that are set locally or that tell a story of Hawaii. And there's a wonderful novel from many years back called In the Land of Sweet Pies and Soldiers, I think is the name of it, which tells the story of the Big Island during World War II, when there was a military base near Waimea. So I love novels, but also novels set locally are very fun to read.
What about for what you like to write? Like, do you favor poetry or the fiction, either short story or novel or essay, anything pull you more, or are you kind of mixed?
Right now I'm doing flash fiction and short stories. That I had a lot of fun writing my novel, but it took me 10 years to write it. It was, and it was maybe 9 years of that was just revising it. So the novel was a good experience for me to write, and I enjoyed writing it. But in a novel or any long piece like that, of course, you have to dot your I's and cross your T's. You have to make sure that what you said in the second chapter is not inconsistent with what you're saying in the 15th chapter, and that you didn't change somebody's blonde hair to brown hair midway through, and that and that they maintain their character throughout the novel, throughout all of your chapters. So it was a lot of work, and I'm glad I did it. But I have more fun writing poetry and real short stories, flash fiction, just because it's a little less labor intensive to do that.
I would definitely agree with you. I haven't tackled a novel or anything more than a really short story. So keeping that thread, like you say, really, you have to stay with it and keep it in your head. So one thing that you've mentioned when we've talked before is that you often have an idea that you mull around for a while before you start putting it on paper. Can you say a little bit about that part of your process as a writer, like how something develops for you? generally?
Yeah, and I don't think the way I approach writing is common necessarily, because I know a lot of people who write have a set time to write, and they sit at their computer, they get their pad and their pencil, and they start writing. And maybe they do that every morning for an hour, or twice a week for 3 hours, whatever. But that's not my process. Sounds a little arrogant, but that's not how I roll. I don't believe in writer's block. I don't have anything like writer's block, because I just I kind of create in my head. That's just when I'm walking, when I'm driving, things occur to me, and I kind of mull that around. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. Sometimes nothing occurs to me. A couple of months ago, I was driving and I was thinking, it's been a really long time since you thought of something that you might want to write about. It's been like 2 or 3 months. Maybe you're never going to write again. And the next day, something popped in my head. So it's just how my brain works, and I'll mull it over. Sometimes I will focus on something in my head that I think I'm going to write about, and I'll put it on paper, and it doesn't work at all. And sometimes I will continue to work on it. Other times I'll look at it and just know this is never going to be anything I like. Yeah, I'm not I've written people say that you can't be a writer unless you write every day. And I think I would just sit at the iPad and just freeze if I was forcing myself to write.
Yeah.
The other type of writing that I've done, and actually my nephew writes, he's a teacher, and he writes, and we talk about this sometimes, because I don't know if it is in our DNA, but we both do this. Sometimes you can just sit at your computer or with a pencil in your hand and a pad, and you can just turn your brain off and let your hands go. We call it magic writing, and he does it as well. And you're not trying to write. You're not trying to think of anything. You're just letting inspiration go through you without necessarily your brain interfering in the meantime. Mm-hmm. And so I'll do that every once in a while and see what comes out on the page. And sometimes that's fun to do, and gives me a little break from dwelling on things in my head.
I'm glad you shared that, because that's kind of, I like you call it magic writing or inspirational writing, where you don't sit down with a plan or even an idea, but you're like, well, let's see what words come out, and just start writing words and see what develops. And then maybe you take it and do something with it, and then maybe you don't. But I think that's a valuable process for people to be aware of. Well, Donna, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so excited that you are here, and I know you've been waiting and waiting for this moment. So I really appreciate it. I want to let people know, if they want to know more about the Guild, you can go to the website, www.hawaiiwritersguild.com. There's also a Facebook page, Hawaii Writers Guild. Until next time, everyone, aloha.
Thank you, Eila.